Hi, welcome to See the Summarized channel. Our movie today begins with the opening scene, and we are watching the solar eclipse in the year 1957. There was a priest with a small child who had still been born a few days ago, and the priest was very afraid for him because the child had a unique mark on his heart. At that time, the priest placed the innocent child on the platform and began to pray and say a prayer for him, and as soon as the priest he finished and took out a dagger and seemed to be encouraged, he intended to stick the dagger into the child's heart because the mark on his chest was a sign of evil and evil would spread to humanity. This time, the police arrived and ordered the priest to throw the dagger and those who would kill him, but the priest warned them about the child and what they were doing would be blamed on them, but the soldiers had only one solution: to kill the priest and save him. The child in front of them was innocent, and in the scene after that, we know that we have gone back about 30 years on this topic and we see a secret priest like this, and at the same time an exorcist, and people know him as Father Marek, and we see him riding a bus on the highway. He looked very strange. He had a map and had a cigarette before arriving at the church. He was welcomed by a monk named Andrew. He welcomed him very much and told him that he was grateful to him for joining their church on his own and without anyone urging him. This is not something that happens very often, and Marek started to look a little sad. So, in every corner of the church he saw a number of priests, and they were explaining that this church was in fact an asylum. And most of the time, cases of people possessed and under the influence of Satan came to them, and they were seeing this, but the priests who were present were famous for being monks, and also partners with a group of Muslims in exorcising spirits and living together inside the organization. And after that, Brother Mark gets to know Brother Darwin, known as Jack, who is a permanent resident of the sanatorium. After that, we see that the three meet inside the storage area, which was isolated, and we see David offering some sacred tools to Brother Marek, but Marek respectfully refused and was determined to use them. His tools, because he was used to them. And after that, Orion told Marek about the standard procedures that were required of him in the asylum, and after that, Darwin began to conduct an examination on Marek and took from him his cigarette bag so that he would not be able to drink these things in the church, and he took the place where he would sleep. And he had not. There was no electricity, no cell phones, and no internet, but they told Mark that he would be very happy with the experience they had at that church. After that, they let Marek relax a little and get used to the room. After that, we see Marek change his clothes and see the mark on his chest. And we know that this is the child who had the accident happen 30 years ago. He started opening his bag, which had a secret place, and it contained a gun, a flashlight, and many other things that were not allowed in the church. Mark took out a piece of paper like this before closing his bag, and this paper was in a small newspaper article about games called ball games. And at that time he was in, one of the women was kidnapped, and in the next scene we see all the priests and monks gathered in the dining area and began to say their prayers, that is, before they all had dinner together. Mark was very disgusted with the food because it smelled strange and looked strange, and he did not understand how the priests eat so easily, and he began to eat, meaning good health. In the scene that follows, we see Marek taking a wrap in the sanatorium and saw a lot of different foods. However, many of the cases were poisoned, and each one was in a different room until he saw a woman. Mark kept looking at her like that for a while, as if she was a monk, and after that he decided to go back to his headquarters and take it. He took a shower, but during this time, Marek did not notice the cross that was in his room, and in the next scene, we see the monks preparing for an exorcism session in the asylum, and Mark entered a room full of burning candles, and there were some monks inside, and he discovered that the woman he had seen before was in the room. The one who was tied up in the bed, while the girl was completely silent, looked at the ceiling, and only then the monk was about to gather all the monks around him, and the deputy monk brought a camera to film the exorcism session so that the new priests could learn from this experience. And after that, they started the rituals, and it was not comfortable for the woman, whose name is Ender Sag, but the monk told her that she would rest after that, meaning he would help her, and Mark started watching and knowing how the evil spirits were expelled, and the priest started sprinkling holy water on the woman. And at that time she started to feel confused, and the monk started saying his holy prayer, and it was a Latin prayer, and all the other monks were saying the prayer behind him. And at that time the woman started moving slowly around the bed. Because they went deeper into the prayer, she began to move violently on the bed, and strange and frightening sounds were playing from it. The bed was shaking in an unnatural way, and it did not stop the wind and non-human sounds coming out of it. After that, the monk grabbed the cross and raised it on the woman and began to continue his prayer, but the woman screamed louder and the fire went silent. The cross and fell in love with it, and after the exorcism session, Marek went to the bathroom in his room to wash his face, and it was like this in the mirror that was broken when he touched it even slightly, and he was terrified of the situation, and after a short while, we saw that the door to her safe opened by itself, and a very strange rattling sound came out of the door, and Marek was frightened and left his headquarters and walked into the entrance of the organization. At that time, he revealed a mysterious door in the corner of the entrance and approached it. When he was about to enter the mysterious room, Darwin appeared in front of him and told Marek that he could not enter this room as long as the monks were not afraid to enter, and after that, Marek heard. He spoke and went with the monk for dinner, and as usual, Marek also saw all the monks eating this incomprehensible food. But Marek did not know how to digest it at all, and he returned like this as soon as he returned to his room, and he felt a severe pain in his stomach, in addition to the terrible pain that was in his teeth, and at that time he looked like this as he stepped into the mirror and found him scrambling and an insect came out of him. He was terrified and did not understand how this had happened and how his lesson had been taken off, even though he had never complained about it. The scene after that, we see Marek returning to the room he had wanted to enter before, and he used a small, sharp tool that was in his swimming pool and opened the lock on the door. He entered and learned that this place was the office of the monk Ryer, and Marek began quietly looking at the shelves until he saw that there was a hole in the painting drawn. When he touched the painting, at that time he heard a cracking sound and knew that there was a secret door behind the painting. It was in a scary room for him, and he saw a small storeroom in which there were tapes, a cassette, and a television set, and when he played the tapes, he saw a random video of a woman from whom the evil spirit had been exorcised. After that, he walked from Friar Pryor's office and went to the room he was in when the exorcism of the possessed girl took place. He began to look around every corner of the room and learned that there was a device that controlled the bed, and a god is responsible for this frightening sound and this terrible smell. However, the cross was not lit by Satan. He had a lighter behind him, and it was the one that burned the cross. On the other hand, Marek knew that this exorcism was organized and did not think about it. He returned to his room confused and not understanding how something like this had happened, and he brought the cross that was there. On the alert, he hid in the closet of the room. In the scene after that, we see Pryor gathering the rest of the monks to pray together, and he called for Marek to come out, meaning to say the recitations of repentance on the podium, but Marek was acting very strangely and was hesitant and did not know what to say. They asked him to pray in Latin, but he preferred. He says random Latin words to someone, but Andrew's Edge interrupts this and asks Father Pio to continue reading, and in the next scene we see them having dinner, and Marek found himself swallowing strands of hair that were present, meaning in the food, which looked ugly, and he started coughing in the middle of this place and returned to his room and found the cross was attached to the cushion. As he felt very dangerous, opened his bag, took out the gun, put it in his pocket, and also burned the newspaper article about the kidnapped woman. In the scene after that, we see Marek walking in the hall, and he is nervous and does not understand the strange events that are happening, whether the strange food, the subject of the cross, or the mirror. The one who broke it was very disappointed and felt that something dangerous was happening in this asylum. He saw some monks digging a grave outside the asylum with a coffin as if they were going to bury someone. The scene after that, we see Marek going to make sure of the safety of the girl they had performed an exorcism on before, but he saw that the room was empty. There was nothing to confirm that she was released from an asylum, and at that time Father Potter, the deputy of the monks, was behind Marek and watching, and asked him to come and confess. They went to the church to enter, meaning to the confessional, and at that time Father Pio began to warn him because the other monks were watching and they were not sure that Marek would walk according to their rules and it would not be better for him to stay. He explores their asylum, and then Mark begins to admit that he is neither a priest nor an exorcist. He is an officer and is looking for justice because there is a woman who has been kidnapped from his area, and his mission is that Marek is going to the church in disguise because he heard news from a dusty person that the kidnapped woman is in the asylum. And he said that the officers are not helpful. They stormed the church because of the incident that happened 30 years ago, when they killed a priest. At that time, Father Bodroxel, all the blindness of the souls were fabricated so that the monks would draw attention to the asylum in order to take funding. After that, Biosab Mark comes with a final warning before he gets to the confessional, and in the scene that follows, we see Marek return. He went to his room and was looking for someone to watch, and then he tried to remove his safe from a place, and he found a hole in which there were black and frightening liquids, and he tried to put his hand in the hole slowly, and he found that there was a strange device made of human bone, and there was an eye on the device above, and at that time, Marek came back from afar. The sight was not disgusting, but the fluids were still black. And at that time he heard strange noises and found that there were insects in these fluids. In the scene that follows that, we see Marek watching the door of his room and began to see his hallucinations, and his face was covered with black fluids until night was night, and he went out to look for the woman, the kidnapped woman, and when he went to the coffin outside the hospital, he discovered that the coffin was empty, and either the monks were deceiving or transporting the body in a second place. After that, Father Darwin appeared behind him and placed a piece of cloth on his head. In the next scene, we see Mark sitting in his bed while he was curled up in bed. The monk saw his forbidden need, and Darwin was watching him as he struggled to untie the rope. Brewer brought some meat and began to eat Marek. Well, he felt disappointment and failure, so he thought that Marek would help him in the asylum. After that, Marek lost consciousness the first time he ate the meat. Woke up at one point in the night and noticed that Darwin was in the hospital. Fell asleep and tried to untie himself quickly and took advantage of this opportunity to escape, but Darwin woke up from sleep and the two of them entered into a violent battle with each other. Darwin was huge and very strong, and Marek was stubborn. He took his gun and killed him quickly. The first thing Marek wanted to do was to find out the source of the hideous food that he was eating by force. About him, he accidentally saw a freezer which contained the bodies of kidnapped women hanging like teddy bears, and Marek knew that the monks were eating women's organs all the time. And in the next scene we see Marek meeting Father Pio in the kitchen, and who was afraid, because he saw that Marek was determined to escape, but he decided the first one took him to the place of his old office and took out an old book and began to read the rituals. The book spoke about the chosen person and the person who was born at the time of the eclipse. He had to die using a sacred dagger. When he did not match, he would grow up and eat 7 sins and a portion of the blood of innocent people. Once the rituals were completed, the person's hour would be complete. He will turn into a terrifying and murderous being, and he will destroy the world. Bio guessed that Marek was the chosen one, and most of the monks knew this even though they were monks, because they loved the topic that the chosen one would destroy the world. This time, Marek saw a page with the same mark on his chest, and he was afraid and could not believe the story. Pio, of course, these are just legends, because all his life he never felt different, and the two of them started thinking about a plan to escape from the asylum, and Pio suggested a plan and said that there is a hidden passage and the person comes out, meaning outside the hospital at all. And the two of them decided to escape together in order to gain each other's trust. This does not mean that Pio he proved to him his good intentions and let him seize back because he was severely flogged in his last attempt to escape from the asylum. In fact, the two of them entered a small tunnel and its darkness and continued to crawl for a while, that is, until they went deeper and entered a cave. Suddenly they heard the sound of a shower coming from behind them, and the king was surprised by 2 of the monks who were coming down, striking in it, and his movement was paralyzed. On the other, he saw that he was standing there, and he knew that he was being set up and was preparing for him, meaning an ambush with the rest of the monks. After that, he lost consciousness, and in the scene after that, we see Marek regain consciousness again, but he was tied, meaning to a wooden post, and all the monks of the church were gathered around him, wearing red. It is not the same dress every time, and Andreas Edge said that he brought Marek today specifically because it is one of the rare things that appeared after thousands of years. They apologized to Marek for their hard work with him, but they did not have a second choice, and everything they do now is for a specific goal. And I am building a good building, and they feel that the time of the terrifying creature has come and all of humanity must be punished because humans have become very unjust and commit more sins than before, and every criminal must take the penalty for the crime he committed. However, the monks, knew that the gate to hell was located in a well close to the church, and that is why they built the asylum in this very place. While they were waiting, they had years left, and the chosen person would not appear. As soon as the ritual was over, the terrifying creature would emerge from the well and enter Mark's body. After a short period, the monks began to complete the ritual in Latin, and the last request meant that they needed to sacrifice a sparkling body, and for that reason they brought one woman, and they were training on a topic. When Marek saw her in an exorcism room, she was the woman whom Marek had been looking for in the grocery store for a long time, and he was very happy when he saw her, but he did not know the reason for her presence in the ritual until the monks suddenly slaughtered her in cold blood and without any mercy or a trace of blood, and the girl died on the ground. Long and blood was everywhere, and they put some of it in a cup, and each of the monks began to drink from it, and until they seized Mark's brain, forced him to drink from the poor girl's blood, and the monks continued to pray in Latin, and each monk was saying a different hymn from the other, so that the terrifying monk would respond to any why, but exactly after they finished the recitations. And even that is to say, all the readings that were required and those that were not required, they also said it because nothing happened, and the being did not come out of the grave as they had imagined, and Mark was very happy and kept laughing, and the monks did not understand. They did not know they made a mistake. Yes, and they asked Hio to check all the steps of the reading. Maybe they made a mistake in their order, and in fact, Pio began looking through the old book for every step they missed or any instructions they needed to follow, but unfortunately, he told them that he did not find any gaps, but the rest of the priests were confused and did not know how something like this could happen. Although their ancestors in the past, they performed these rituals, and it is true that the rituals were centuries old or even 2,000 years old, but they followed the instructions of their ancestors exactly, and Father Pio tried to draw their attention to the fact that they might have gotten the wrong copy of the book of rituals, and in fact he began to blame them and tell them that they had certainly made a mistake in reciting it. He asked them to go back to their office and think about this topic tomorrow in a meeting after dinner, and they agreed. Really, but they were very worried about Marek because the police were definitely searching for him everywhere, and he spent a long time in the hospital, and they knew that this would be the only place he was in. He storms into the church as soon as possible so that they can take him away, and the discussion of the incident that happened with them 30 years ago will not make any difference. And that is why Father Pitt apologized to Marek before he did what he did and brought out his own dagger, stabbing him and sticking it in Marek's eyes until he lost consciousness and was certain that he was dead, and the monks began to remove him from the pillar. They simply threw him into the well, and in the next scene we see them living their lives as normal the second day, as if nothing had happened at all. Even the abbot of the holy monastery was drinking his wine and playing songs, saying goodbye, oh world, saying goodbye and living his life all night, and at this time the cross that was in his room was moving, random directions, but I don't care about him, because he was very drunk, and in the scene after that we see Father Pio entering him and seeing his lost state and trying to help the head of the monastery to rest on his bed so that none of the priests would see him and get bad thoughts about him, but Father Pio turned out to be worse than him. He grabbed his pillow and placed it on the head of the monastery's face and began to slowly suffocate him, despite the fact that the head of the monastery was dying at the last moment of his life, but his weight was heavy and he preferred to hold the pillow tightly until the head stopped moving. And in the scene that follows that we see the monks of the church burning all the bodies of the women, those who kidnapped them, while Father Mama was feeling sad with them, and the monks at that time saw the body of the abbot of the monastery. And Father Pio took advantage of this situation to his advantage and said that he was taking over his position while his heart was broken, and it would not be easy for him to remain in the president's place, and in the scene that follows that we see that Marek came out alive and came back. He became conscious again in the well and began to get up slowly and look around the place and found that the whole place was full of human bones, and at that time his body began to tremble and his voice began to change, and in the scene that follows that we see Father Pio saying his prayers and informing all the monks of his new position, and they all began saying Latin recitations for the soul of the head of the monastery, and when Fr. Bader tried to enter the second prayer, he found himself unable to speak, move, or breathe, and the Bible fell from his hand. He was trying to ask for help, but the monks did not understand his condition and whether he was calling for their help or was this a kind of ritual, until we saw Father Biodroxel in the position of the cross, and suddenly the Father's voice Pio came out and was screaming from the pen and asking for the evening of the monks and saying that, meaning a quick recitation of the Bible, but at this moment a door opened and a huge amount of insects came out of it, and in the scene that follows, we learn that these insects are auxiliary soldiers for the terrifying place that the monks were waiting for from thousands years ago. This creature was called the colored goat, and this is how we know that the monks' attempt at the recitation succeeded, and the creature came to them as they asked, and Alkin knew how to enter the asylum, and the monks did not know why he was upset, because they were already cheering and started screaming in fear, and they tried to escape from the asylum until Alkin used his strength and froze him in their place. And in fact, all the monks were frozen in place, and even his sacred statue began to move and look like this towards the creature. He was still in the spirit, and at that time the creature tried to imitate the position of the holy statue and made all the monks flip in the air with their minds toward the ground in order to remain in the same position of the statue. And in the scene that follows that we see all the trees and flowers that were dead slowly came back to life, and this means that the power of this being is not destruction or anything. It brings back the beautiful things that died to life again, and it kills the people whose hearts are dark and creates the second world for them so that they can take their punishment. In the next and last scene, we see the roof. The church was broken by the power of the being, and at that time the sky peered in it like an open door, and it was in severe agony. This means that the world is now governed by a new system, and from the open door, strange beings will descend on the earth to kill every oppressor. Only then, my friend, will we be at our great salvation, and I will see you in the greatness that is to come. Bye, peace.